Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. On the Novus Ordo calendar, we have the feast of Saint Claude de la Colombière. And so I'm offering a votive mass. So you can offer a mass for any canonized saint, but if it's not on the calendar, it's a votive mass. So that's what we're doing today, votive mass of Blessed Saint Claude de la Colombière. So I will speak about him, and he was a Jesuit priest in the 17th century, spiritual advisor, confessor to Margaret Mary Alacoque, instrumental in getting the devotion to the Sacred Heart propagated. So we take it for granted now, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, but he very much helped her to make that popular. But first, note, the saints for today, commemorated saints for today, Saint Faustinus and Jovita, these were brothers, born noblemen in Brescia, Italy. And it was, this is going to be around, it's the time of the Emperor Hadrian is when they were martyred. But their zeal was such that they preached the gospel even when the bishop of their town had gone into hiding and was silent. They continued to preach and to witness to the faith. For that reason, they were imprisoned. And they have a great story because they wanted to make an example out of them. And so they took these two brothers and they had them martyred, thrown to the wild beasts in the amphitheater, and they wanted to get as many people as possible to witness this. Look at what happens when you defy the governor. Look at what happens when you preach the faith after we've told you not to do it. So they got these two brothers in that amphitheater, and by their constancy in enduring their sufferings, there were some other miracles as well. They converted 15,000 of the spectators. See what happens when you defy God. See what happens when you resist God. See what happens when you try to stamp out the faith. That was the message God was sending to the Roman government, right? And that is how evil always backfires on itself. They brought as many people as possible, thinking that they were going to impress the people and continue their efforts to discourage conversions. It had the precise opposite effect. So it's this story of Faustinus and Jovita. Stories of these and similar to these, why I'm not worried about what's happening in the country right now. I am not worried. Biden is president, everything's going on the tubes. The way that God reverses things is by letting evil get exactly what it wants. Now, we may have to suffer imprisonment and torture and so on, so we shrink from that, but if we have more courage, how could I say this? They go together. Faith and courage go together. If we're not afraid to face that, then we'll be at peace, and then we'll see, our faith will be absolutely rock solid. It is rock solid, what we believe in. There's just no reason to be agitated or upset or to fear. So pray for courage, pray for faith. Thus my side comments. And I said I wanted to keep these sermons shorter, and I've abbreviated those two lives of the saints there. But Saint Claude de la Colombière, just absolutely fascinating and wonderful saint. I would say for the church, especially for these, I would not say for the Novus Ordo church, but for the traditional church, he's a really important figure. In that he was a spiritual director, as I said, to Margaret Mary Alacoque in the 17th century. He was one of 7 children, and 4 of them entered the religious life. He entered the Jesuits at 17 and was ordained a priest about 11 years later. And he gained notice for the clarity and soundness of his sermons, which he preached against Jansenism. Now, Jansenism at that time was an offshoot of Calvinism. And Jansenism was this theological movement, primarily active in France, that emphasized original sin, human depravity, the absolute necessity of divine grace, and predestination. It was heretical. And it was condemned by the church repeatedly, and very much like today's modernists, the Jansenists at the time said that they agreed with condemnations. They said that they agreed with the doctrines and teachings of the church, but they just they hid their doctrines a little bit more cleverly and continued to preach heresy and so on. Their basic, if I could summarize it, was nothing you do is pleasing to God. I should take that back. That's Calvinism, Protestantism. You don't know that anything you do is pleasing to God. You could be in mortal sin right now and not know it. All of your confessions could be invalid. All of your Holy Communions could be sacrilegious, and you don't know. That's Jansenism. And all you can do is beg for God to send his grace upon you, but there are some people that God predestines to hell, and there's nothing you can do about it. Right? That's Jansenism. Now, we get this confused in the traditional church. You may hear people like, oh, that guy's a real Jansenist. What they mean is he's a rigorist, and the two are connected. Rigorism is the idea that Jansenism doesn't exist in the church anymore, by the way. That was a heresy that was defeated, but the mark that it left was rigorism, because Jansenists were absolute rigorists. A rigorist is someone who, when you have a choice between like two options, like I'm not sure what to do, like this could be morally permissible or it might not be morally permissible, like how do I know which is which? The rigorist says if there's the slightest chance it might not be permissible, you can't do it. If there's the slightest chance it could possibly be a sin, you can't do it. Even if there's overwhelming evidence that, it's probably not a sin, it's most likely not a sin, you might be a little bit scrupulous, the rigorist says, no, you can't do it at all, because it's better to be safe than sorry. If there's the slightest chance you might be offending God, possibly, don't do it at all. And you can't live life that way, because the human mind, it worries, it thinks things, and that's a surefire way to scrupulosity. So because the Jansenists were absolute rigorists, which is a position condemned by the church, they were associated with that. You're a Jansenist, meaning you're a rigorist. And so we still hear that today. In the traditional church, rigorism or Jansenism for somebody who is, and really it's associated with pride, right? They are always careful. No, you have to avoid sin. You have to avoid sin. And typically, it's certain kinds of sins. The rigorists tend to be those of the melancholic or choleric temperament. It's very easy for them to avoid certain sins. It's very easy. They're not even tempted by it. It's very easy for them to give up certain things, so it should be for you as well. Well, I don't care about entertainment. I don't watch movies. I don't watch TV. I don't go to the theaters. I don't go to the beach. And there's a slightest chance those things might be sinful, so nobody should do them at all. You should stop going to the beach, going to the movies, watching TV, all these things, because you could sin, right? That's the Jansenist, rigorist attitude. Anyways, I could go on about this, but that is what Claude de la Colombière was fighting against, was preaching against that. That is not true. That is not how God is. And he was already devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, right? Which we don't have condemnation from the Sacred Heart, we have love, right? The people who condemn themselves, or rather I should say evil condemns itself, right? That is where condemnation comes from. Evil hates what is good. So he's already, he's preaching against Jansenism, rigorism. He's preaching the devotion to the Sacred Heart, which wasn't, St. John Eudes had started the devotion to the Sacred Heart, or rather I say gave it a mass and an office, but it wasn't widespread. It wasn't until he'd been a priest for about 5 years, he was assigned to the spiritual director of the Visitation Sisters at Paray-le-Monial, among whom was Margaret Mary Alacoque. And nobody believed her. They all thought she was crazy, she was having visions, she was a kook, she was whatever. Very, very hard for her, and her spiritual directors, her confessors, didn't understand her. Finally, Claude de la Colombière comes along, he understands, he believes her, and that's a very great relief for her. But this is what God always does. He didn't just let her rest and be like, oh, finally somebody who understands and believes me, thank you very much. He told her, write your visions down. Write down what you're seeing. Write down what he's telling you. You have a job to do. She's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd rather be poor and unknown. I don't want to have any fame or notoriety. And he says, too bad, tough, you got to write this down. So there's always a challenge for the saints. So he was there for about 3 years, and he helped her to publish her diary, and it became absolutely famous very quickly. And even in her lifetime, and of course continues today. A great devotion of the church, a devotion to the Sacred Heart. Claude de la Colombière, for his part, would be assigned to, after that, to be the confessor to Mary Modena, the wife of King James II. Well, he wasn't king yet, but he would be. And he's in England. He would be the English king as a Catholic in the late 1600s. England is Protestant by this point. England is Anglican. They're very anti-Catholic, and yet they would get King James II, who was an Anglican, but he converted secretly. And then he became king, and it was kind of a big deal there in England. So that's why Claude de la Colombière was sent to the royal palace in England as confessor, as a Jesuit. And Jesuits were hated in England. So he was accused of taking part in a plot to overthrow the king, to restore Catholicism. He was thrown in prison. It ruined his health. He was treated very, very roughly. Eventually, King Louis XIV asked for his release and got it. And then he went back to France. He tried to continue preaching and teaching. He wasn't able to do so after about 3 years. He retired to Paray-le-Monial, where he died today in... He was 41 years old is when he died. The day after his death, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque received a vision in which she understood that Claude needed no prayers as he was already in heaven. And he's considered what we call a white martyr, having suffered every abuse for the faith except death. Now, in the very little time I have remaining, I will squeeze in a couple of things here. The prayer of Claude de la Colombière to God, his prayer of hope and his prayer of, I would almost say, his prayer of predestination, why he believed that he would be saved, and then a vow that he took with the Jesuits. The Jesuits, one of their vows is they have poverty, chastity, obedience, or poverty, chastity, obedience with a specialty on obedience. That's their special charism. But he takes this vow, this very hard vow, and you would think this is what a rigorist says everybody should do. And he was preaching against that, but then he took it himself. That's always a sign of sanctity, is you're hard on yourself but easy on others. But he says he made a vow to observe all the rules of his order, and he bound himself to practice continual mortification in all things. And he says, on the 6th day, when I was considering this particular vow which I made, I found myself filled with great gratitude to God who gave me the grace to make this vow. I experienced great joy at seeing myself bound with 1,000 chains to do the will of God. The thought of this obligation, far from terrifying me, filled me with intense joy. Far from being made a slave by it, I feel that I have entered the kingdom of liberty and peace. He says, I feel also, I have so often tasted great interior joy from the thought that I am in the service of God. I realized this is worth infinitely more than the favor of kings. The occupations of worldly people appear despicable to me in comparison with our occupation in the service of God. I feel an increasingly great desire to be attached to the observance of my rule. The practice of it causes me the greatest pleasure. The more exact I become in the observance of it, the more I seem to enter into the enjoyment of perfect liberty. This exact observance is certainly not burdensome to me. On the contrary, my yoke makes me feel lighter. I regard this as the greatest grace I have ever received during my life. He continues, I look with respect on those whom God visits with humiliations and adversity, of whatever nature they may be. These are, doubtless, his favorites. The following words never come to my mind, except the words light, peace, liberty, consolation also come with them. These words are simplicity, confidence, humility, entire abandonment, nothing kept back, the will of God, my rules. That was St. Claude de la Colombière's vow. Now, what do you think? What kind of a prayer would he say? What would he think of himself having made this vow and having kept it? And it was said, his contemporaries said, his superior said, he kept this vow perfectly. Perfectly he kept this vow. What did he write in a prayer? My God, I am so persuaded that you watch over all who hope in you, and that nothing can be lacking to those who await from you all things, that I have determined to live from now on without any concern, letting go and giving you all my anxieties. I will sleep and rest in peace, because you, Lord, and only you have secured my hope. Men can deprive me of possessions and reputation. Illnesses can take away my strength and my means to serve you. I myself can lose your grace because of sin, but I will not lose my hope. I will conserve it until the last instant of my life, and all the efforts of demons trying to take it away from me will be useless. I will sleep and rest in peace. May others expect happiness in their talents and richness. May others lean on the innocence of their life, or the rigors of their penance, or on the amount of their good works, or the fervor of their prayers. But for myself, Lord, all my confidence lies in confidence itself, because you, Lord, only you have secured my hope. No one has ever been deceived by this confidence. No one who has waited on the Lord has been frustrated. Therefore, I am sure that I will be eternally happy because I firmly hope to be, and because you, my God, are he in whom I expect all. Now that prayer continues, but look at the difference. Look at the difference between the vow he took to practice continual mortification, continual and perfect obedience. That's an incredible accomplishment. That's an incredible zeal. That's an incredible talent. And yet he said that's not why he hoped. He didn't hope for salvation in his talents or his obedience or his virtues or whatever. He hoped in the mercy of God purely. My hope is my hope that God, you will me to be saved. That's why he hoped. So that is the difference. I would like us all to try to imitate how you could say that combination of an earnest and a serious desire to do rigorous penance, to be very obedient, to be very mortified, but that at the same time to trust completely in God and in his mercy, not to worry about whether I succeed or I fail or I sin or I don't sin or I'm perfect or I'm a sinner. It is all about hope in the mercy of God. Try as hard as we can and then throw ourselves in the mercy of God, and then don't worry, be at peace. I wish for all of us to have combine these two attitudes, these two virtues. So let's ask for the intercession of Blessed Saint Claude de la Colombière for that virtue, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, and indeed all the saints. May God bless you all. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. February 15th, Saint Claude de la Colombière. An artist, a contemporary of Claudio, has left us a portrait, painted when he was between 35 and 41 years old. Elongated face, small but bright eyes with a penetrating gaze, broad forehead, well-proportioned mouth, and a somewhat sharp chin. It is said that when Claudio entered the Society of Jesus, he was rather robust, of a very cheerful character, of high ideals, prudent and pleasant. Religious life only developed these natural gifts. His innate intelligence became accustomed to intellectual curiosity and to sharp and accurate judgments. Claudius loved the fine arts and corresponded with Oliverius Patru, a member of the French Academy, who praised his writings highly. But these natural gifts would have had little value in the work for souls if the blessed had not united to them the interior spirit of a religious thirsting for the glory of God. The source of his interior life was union with God in prayer, to which he constantly gave himself. He became so accustomed to referring everything to God that human respect and worldly motives did not exist for him. This extraordinary detachment from the world was his main characteristic. Blessed Claude was born in Saint-Symphorien d'Auzon near Lyon in 1641. His family was well-connected, pious, and well-to-do. We do not possess any special information about his life before he entered the Collegiate of the Society of Jesus in Lyon. Although he felt great repugnance for religious life, he managed to overcome it and was immediately admitted to the society. He made his novitiate in Avignon, and after 2 years went to the college in that city to complete his studies in philosophy. After completing his studies, he was assigned to teach grammar and humanities from 1661 to 1666. Since 1659, the city of Avignon had witnessed constant clashes between the nobles and the people. In 1662, the famous encounter between the papal guard and the entourage of the French ambassador took place in Rome. Following that incident, the troops of Louis XIV occupied Avignon, which was in the territory of the popes. However, this did not interrupt the work of the college, and the rise of Calvinism only redoubled the zeal of the Jesuits, who devoted themselves with greater zeal to apostolic ministries in the city and in the surrounding districts. When peace was restored, Avignon celebrated the canonization of Saint Francis de Sales. A great liturgical function was held in the older of the two convents of the Visitation. On that occasion, Blessed Claudius displayed for the first time his gifts as an orator, for although he was not yet a priest, he was one of those chosen to preach the panegyric of the holy bishop in the convent church. The text he chose was, "Out of strength has come forth gentleness," and the sermon turned out to be magnificent. In the meantime, The superiors had decided to send the young Claudius to finish his studies of theology in Paris, the center of intellectual life in France. In that city, he was entrusted with the honor of looking after the education of the two sons of the famous Colbert. What probably happened was that Colbert discovered Claudio's intellectual stature and chose him for this important office, even though he personally was no friend of the Jesuits. However, the relations of the Blessed with that distinguished family ended badly because a satirical phrase that Claudio had written came to the knowledge of the minister, who was extremely offended and asked the superiors of the society to send the Blessed back to his province. This could not be done until 1670. In 1673, the young priest was appointed preacher of the College of Avignon. His sermons, on which he worked intensely, are true models of the genre, as much for the solidity of the doctrine as for the beauty of the language. The Blessed seems to have later preached the same sermons in England, and the name of the Duchess of York, Mary of Modena, later Queen, when James II inherited the throne, in whose chapel Claudius preached, is linked to the editions of these sermons. The Blessed, during his stay in Paris, had studied Jansenism with its half-truths and its calumnies in order to combat from the pulpit its errors, animated as he was by the love of the Sacred Heart, whose devotion would be the best antidote against Jansenism. At the end of 1674, Father Lachaise, the Blessed's rector, received from the general of the society the order to admit him to solemn profession, after a month of spiritual exercises in the so-called third probation. This retreat was of great spiritual benefit to Claude, who felt, as he confessed, called to consecrate himself especially to the Sacred Heart. Blessed Claudio added to the solemn vows of profession a vow of absolute fidelity to the rules of the society, even in the smallest details. As he noted in his diary, he had already lived for some time in this perfect fidelity, and he wanted to consecrate his conduct with a vow to make it more lasting. He was then 33 years old, the age at which Christ died, and this inspired him with a great desire to die completely for the world and for himself. As he wrote in his diary, "It seems to me, Lord, that it is time for me to begin to live in you and only for you, for at my age you wanted to die for me in particular." 2 months after his solemn profession, in February 1675, Claude was named superior of the College of Paray-le-Monial. On the one hand, it was an exceptional honor to entrust to a young professed the government of a house. But on the other hand, the small community of Paray, which had only 4 or 5 fathers, was insignificant for the great gifts of Claude. In reality, it was a matter of God's design to put him in contact with a chosen soul who needed his help, Margaret Mary Alacoque. This nun was in a period of perplexity and suffering, due to the extraordinary revelations of which she had been the victim. She was in a period of perplexity and suffering due to the extraordinary revelations of which the Sacred Heart had made her the object, which became clearer and more intimate with each passing day. Following the indications of her superior, Mother de Saumaise, Margaret entrusted herself to a very learned priest, but who lacked knowledge of mysticism. The priest ruled that Margaret was a victim of the devil's deceptions, something that finally disconcerted the saint. Moved by Margaret's prayers, God sent her his faithful servant and perfect friend, Claude de la Colombière. Father La Colombière went one day to preach to the community of the Visitation. "While he was speaking to us," wrote Margaret, "I heard in my heart these words, 'Behold the one I have sent to you.'" From the first time Margaret went to confession to Father La Colombière, he treated her as if he knew what was happening to her. The saint felt an enormous repugnance to open her heart to him and did not do so, even though she was convinced that it was God's will that she entrust herself to the Blessed. In the following confession, Father La Colombière told her that he was very happy to be an occasion for her to overcome, and immediately, says Margaret, "without doing me the least harm, he laid bare all that was good and bad in my heart, consoled me very much, and exhorted me not to be afraid of the ways of the Lord as long as I remained obedient to my superiors, reiterating to me to give myself totally to God, so that he would treat me as he wished. Father taught me to appreciate God's gifts and to receive his communications with faith and humility." This was Father La Colombière's great service to Marguerite Marie. Moreover, the Blessed worked tirelessly in the propagation of devotion to the Sacred Heart, for he saw in it the best antidote to Jansenism. The Blessed did not stay long in Paray. His next occupation was quite different. On the recommendation of Father Lachaise, who was the confessor of Louis XIV, his superiors sent him to London as preacher to Mary Beatrice d'Este, Duchess of York. Claude preached in England by example and word. Love of the Sacred Heart was his favorite theme. The beatification process speaks of his apostolate in England and of the many Protestants he converted. The position of Catholics in that country was extremely difficult because of the great hostility against them. A movement was formed at court to exclude the Duke of York, who had converted to Catholicism, from the succession to the crown by replacing him with the Prince of Orange or some other candidate. The infamous Titus Oates and his henchmen invented the story of a plot of the Papists in which Father La Colombière would be involved with the rest of the Catholics. The plot was aimed, according to the slanderers, at the assassination of King Charles II and the destruction of the Church of England. Claudius was accused of exercising priestly ministries and of having converted many Protestants. Although he was taken prisoner, the intervention of Louis XIV prevented him from sealing his life with martyrdom. The Blessed was simply banished from England. Prison had taken its toll on his weak health. On his return to France in 1679, the Blessed was already mortally ill. Although at times he recovered a little and was able to exercise his priestly ministries, a kidney disease prevented him from resting. His superiors, thinking that the native airs could help him regain his health, sent him to Lyon and Paris. During one of his visits to the latter city, Margaret Mary informed him that he would die there. Indeed, after having given a marvelous example of humility and patience, Claude Le Colombière gave his soul to God on the evening of February 15, 1682. It seems that the following day, Saint Margaret Mary received a message from heaven that Claude was already in the Glorins and did not need prayers. Father La Colombière was beatified in 1929.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Well, thank you all for braving the weather this morning to come out. The commemorated saints for today are Saints Faustinus and Jovite. These are brothers in the early church who they were arrested for preaching the truth of Christ, defying the emperor's edicts. And they were, in order to make an example of them, they were brought into this giant amphitheater in front of 12,000 spectators and to be eaten by wild beasts. So this is the way of the world to that it attempts to punish and to humiliate Christ. So you have this huge spectacle, 12,000 people. Faustinus and Jovite are thrown into the wild beasts. And nobody's ever seen this before. The wild beasts won't touch them. And I think Faustinus and Jovite, there's this huge miracle. Anyways, it ends up converting the entire amphitheater. So 12,000 people convert. Like, that had the complete opposite effect of what the emperor was going for. And that's how God works. What the enemy does to what it thinks it does to stamp out Christ or to humiliate Christ actually ends up doing the complete opposite. So that should be our lesson, not to listen or not to pay attention to the wisdom of this world. Well, that wouldn't be prudent, or you can't do that, or God can do anything. Right? So don't pay attention to what seems to be this or that, or what the world would tell you to do. Don't listen to that at all. Absolutely not. Preach Christ boldly, and that's when miracles will happen. But for today, so Saint Claude de la Colombière, in the Novus calendar, he was a Jesuit priest and spiritual director to Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque in the late 17th century. He was born in 1641 in southern France, one of 7 children, and 4 of the 7 ended up entering religious life. And he himself would enter the Jesuits at 17 years old. And he was ordained a priest in 1669 at 28, and he soon gained notice for the clarity and soundness of his sermons. He preached very much against Jansenism, and he also had a great devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which, as you know, was promoted. That was before, at this time, 1669. The Sacred Heart of Jesus was just beginning to gain its
fame, and in fact it would be St. Claude de la Colombière with Margaret Mary Alacoque who would end up being the great propagators of this devotion. Now, he was, as I said, he preached very much against Jansenism, and that was a terrible heresy which really wrecked a lot of souls in the 17th century, and even afterwards. In fact, it even felt its effects way up to the Second Vatican Council. Indeed, Jansenism it's a theological movement, and it was primarily active in France, and it emphasized original sin, human depravity, and the absolute necessity of divine grace, as well as advocating predestination. It was heavily influenced by Calvinism and repeatedly condemned by the church hierarchy. The Jansenists, for their turn, they were kind of like the modernists of today. They would agree with the church's condemnations on the surface, but they would continue to teach the substance of their heresy under more disguised forms, which is the worst way of, it's the worst form of pride and the worst kind of heresy, which is essentially duplicity. Yes, I agree with what you're saying, but you change the meaning of the words to mean what you want them to mean. And so it's called Jansenism because the founder of the movement was Cornelius Jansen, and he was a professor, I think, in Belgium, but he wasn't really its promoter. His works were spread far and wide by a friend of his, Abbot John Duvergier, who was in France. And Jansenism wasn't really, Jansenism was kind of the substance, and we often hear that this is a term, an angry traditionalist Catholic will be referred to as a Jansenist, but more properly the term is rigorist. A rigorist is one who favors the more strict interpretation of the law. In fact, a rigorist will favor the strictest interpretation of the law versus one that is less strict but even probable. The Jansenist position taught absolute rigorism, which was that in a conflict of opinions, if there was any possibility at all that a strict interpretation might be possible, you had to take that position even if the more lenient position was overwhelmingly probable. Like, you always had to do the most strictest, rigorous interpretation possible. And that was condemned, repeatedly condemned by the church, and that was what was taught by Jansenism. Now, and sadly, it was a, I mean, at this time in France, 1600s France, that was the flowering of, spirituality. You had the lead up to it. You had, Philip Neri. You had Francis de Sales, Saint Jane Frances de Chantal. You have Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. You just had this beautiful spirituality. But the trouble when sanctity and the spiritual life become popular or attractive, everybody wants to be that. And whether they have good motives or bad motives, everybody wants to appear like what's in vogue. And if sanctity is in vogue, people want to look like they're holy. And Jansenism makes you appear to be very holy, because it's like, oh, look at what I can do because I love God so much, right? And the love God so much part just falls away and ends up being, look at what I can do, right? Look at how holy I am because of all the fasting and all this. And, oh, I'm so strict. I always do the strictest thing. It's just a big pride thing. And so Jansenism can very much appeal to, the ignorant and the proud. The ignorant because they don't know any better, and they think, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. And the proud because it's kind of like somebody who finds out that they're good at something, and they don't have to put forth any effort. They can just suddenly feel like, I'm great at this, and I'm a saint. And so it's just a terrible trap to fall into. I guess the Old Testament version would be Phariseeism, right, which is what their problem was. So that affected France, and that poisoned so many minds. It was most active in France at the time of Claude de la Colombière, and it was so bad that when it was the French priests had to flee due to the Napoleonic Wars. They fled to Spain, and the bishops of Spain would not let the French priests preach or hear confessions because of their Jansenism, their rigorism. And the French spread it to Ireland, and the Irish spread it to America. And you hear a lot about this excessive rigorism in America, and bishops today, even priests today, will talk about how we shouldn't focus on sin and hell and damnation. There was a lot of that influence from the Irish priests in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s, and Vatican II was a backlash against that in many ways, a backlash against Jansenism and rigorism, which was already a heresy. It was already condemned. There didn't need to be a backlash. Everybody knew it was wrong. But anyway, so you see how error can continue for centuries. So Claude de la Colombière was preaching against this, and eventually, 5 years after his ordination, he was assigned as spiritual director to a group of sisters of the Visitation Order at Paray-le-Monial, among whom was the young nun Margaret Mary Alacoque. And she had suffered very much, as she writes in her diary, from spiritual directors who did not understand her. Her whole community didn't understand her and her visions of the Sacred Heart. But when Claude de la Colombière came, he understood her and believed her, and a tremendous relief to her. But he took it one step further and told her that not only did he believe her, she needed to write these down and he was going to publish them. She did not want that at all, but he insisted, and she agreed, and he helped to get the devotion accepted, approved, and eventually popularized. And as I mentioned, he already had a devotion to the Sacred Heart. The Mass and the office had already been written in the church by St. John Eudes about 100 years previously. But it has kind of a sad ending. Just 3 years after being assigned to that convent, he was assigned by King Louis XIV to go to England as the spiritual director to Mary Modena, who was the wife of who would become the future King James II of England. And so as we know, England was long Protestant by this time, by about 100 years. But King James, who was the Duke of something at the time, he wasn't king yet, but he was in line to inherit the throne. And he had converted and become a Catholic, and all the Protestants were just, in an uproar that this man who could very well be king might be Catholic and undo all of the Anglican Church, etc., that had been going on. So that was a huge fear. It would have been wonderful if King James II he did become king, but his Catholicism was very weak, and he really did nothing with it. But the result for Claude de la Colombière was that he was spiritual director to Mary Modena, and during all this fear of James becoming the king, Claude was imprisoned. He was imprisoned and under the pretense of attempting to subvert the throne and the crown and so on, because Charles II was still king at this time, and so Claude was seen as this. He was an open Catholic priest from France, so he was imprisoned and kept for some time. I think it was a number of years, treated horribly. The only reason he was not martyred was due to the intervention of King Louis XIV and, of course, James II. So Claude ended up banished from England, but his health was ruined, and he attempted to return to his former duties, but was unable to. And I think it was just a few years, or maybe not even a year, after being released, he succumbed to death. And he died today, 15 February, at 41 years old. But the day after his death, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque had a vision that Claude needed no prayers, as he was already in heaven. He was what we would have called one of those white martyrs. Quite the story of Claude de la Colombière, and also kind of a little bit about rigorism and Jansenism, which was infecting France at that time and would spread its errors. But that was the point of the Sacred Heart. The Sacred Heart devotion is all about the love of Christ. And so when you have a heresy of anger and justice, and this is overwhelming just rigorism, of course, you're going to have Christ at the same time tempering that with his love. So I would say, there's a beautiful, actually, prayer it's called an act of confidence in God that Claude de la Colombière wrote, and it's just overwhelmingly positive in the hope and in the trust of God. It's just like, there's one section, it says, others may expect happiness in their riches and talents, or many others lean on the innocence of their life, the rigors of their penance, on the amount of their good works, or the fervor of their prayers. But I have none of that. I myself, Lord, all my confidence lies in confidence itself. You, O Lord, are my only hope. And that's really what we should do, is we shouldn't have confidence, even in our good works, our penances, our long fastings and prayers and vigils, that is not going to save us. That's not our salvation. That disposes us to salvation. What all those things do is it disposes us to receive the grace of God, whatever that may be, the salvation of God, however that may come, right? That is so important for us to remember that. Prayers and sanctity, or prayers and fasting and penances, that's not what makes us a saint. You're not achieving sanctity. You're disposing yourself for sanctity, and God gives it to you, right? God gives it to us. That is so important to understand that no matter what we do, it's nothing. It's less than nothing in the eyes of God. It's what we receive, and God, he gives it. He doesn't give it. He gives it to one, but not another. He gives more. He gives less. He gives in proportion, out of proportion, right? Remember the parable of the talents, or the parable of the workers in the vineyard. One worked 1 hour, the other worked 12 hours. They got the same. It doesn't matter. It's more than we deserve. Everything's more than we deserve. So let us be like St. Claude de la Colombière, and hope in God above all, trust in the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and not worry if we're imprisoned, if we die young. It doesn't matter. Trust in the mercy of God. So God bless you all. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Jesus, true friend. Jesus, you are my true friend, my only friend. You take part in all my misfortune. You take them on yourself. You know how to change them into blessings. You listen to me with the greatest kindness when I relate my troubles to you, and you always have balm to pour on my wounds. I find you at all times. I find you everywhere. You never go away. If I have to change my dwelling, I find you wherever I go. You are never weary of listening to me. You are never tired of doing me good. I am certain of being beloved by you if I love you. My goods are nothing to you, and by bestowing yours on me, you never grow poor. However miserable I may be, no one nobler or wiser or even holier can come between you and me, and depriving me of your friendship and death, which tears us away from all other friends, will unite me forever to you. All the humiliation attached to old age or to the loss of honor will never detach you from me. On the contrary, I shall never enjoy you more fully, and you will never be closer to me than when everything seems to conspire against me, to overwhelm me, and to cast me down. You bear with all my faults with extreme patience, and even my want of fidelity and ingratitude do not wound you to such a degree as to make you unwilling to receive me back when I return to you. Jesus, grant that I may die praising you, that I may die loving you, that I may die for the love of you. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, it's Father Gross here. It's 7:27 on February 15th. Hope all of you had a good Valentine's Day yesterday. Just wanted to offer you a good morning to all of you. And I want to share with you, we have another feast day that is today. It's the day after Valentine's Day, and it's the feast of St. Claude de la Colombière. He was a Jesuit priest. And the reason why I want to talk to you about him is because he was the spiritual director and the confessor for St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. And St. Margaret Mary is the one who popularized and made famous devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. You know the images of Sacred Heart with the heart on the outside of Jesus' chest, and it's burning, and there's a crown of thorns around it, right? She's the one that made that popular within the church, and we even hear it today about First Friday devotion, honoring the Sacred Heart of Jesus on the first Friday of each month. She's the one that kind of popularized that, and she also talked about the promises of devotion to the Sacred Heart. The reason why I want to talk about St. Margaret Mary's spiritual director, St. Claude, is to bring up this one very important fact about the spiritual life and following after Jesus, and that is we all need help to be a Christian that is faithful and grows in the spirit of holiness. We all need mentors, spiritual directors, and people we can confide in to live our faith. And the saints did that remarkably well. I just love this point to break down this stereotype that saints are inaccessible to us. Saints are people like you and me, normal people that have talents and skills and passions and hopes and dreams. But those saints, their talents and hopes and dreams and skills were formed by the Holy Spirit to be offered for the glory of God and for the furtherance of the kingdom of God. And that's what makes them remarkable, heroic. They gave everything over to God and let God do what he wanted to do with their gifts, talents, skills, and even their illnesses and struggles and temptations. They gave it all over to God. And here's the thing, they needed help. The saints needed help. So St. Margaret Mary, the great mystic and visionary of the Sacred Heart, needed someone to go to confide her heart to open her heart to bring her questions to bring her doubts, to bring her struggles, to bring her dryness in prayer, her persecution, all the things that happen within the heart of St. Margaret Mary, she was able to bring to St. Claude. And that was the gift that Jesus gave St. Margaret Mary, was the gift of St. Claude to be the companion to walk with her. That's why I really think people have a moment of getting close to the Lord, but then they have no one to turn to when the going gets tough. And that's why there's such a interest in spiritual direction. People wanting to have another person walk with them to talk about their experience and relationship with God. That's why we need small groups to share with one another. That's why we need small Christian communities. That's why just going to Mass by yourself on Sunday ultimately is not enough, but that needs to happen to be the basis of it. You can't do Christianity alone. You just can't be Jesus in you, Bible in you, and find the spirit of holiness that you're looking for from the Holy Spirit. You need people to help you and guide you. So that's just what I want to share with you today, is that living the Christian life is living it with someone there to help you walk down the path. Someone that you know that has gone down the path a little bit farther. And you're able to go to that person and confide your mind and your heart to. That's why, for me, I think being married would be the best way to have a guide at one level. And that's why it's so sad when you see so many marriages in which only one person is interested in faith. Boy, that must be lonely when a spouse wants to offer and share their heart of what God is doing in their heart, and then the spouse isn't interested. Man, it is it's dynamite when a couple lives the spiritual life together. They are able to face anything together. So, we all need guides. We all need spiritual friends. We need people that we can go to and confide in. And that's really the main reason why I wanted to be a priest, is I wanted to help people walk their walk with the Lord. So that's why priests were people that people came to talk to and confide in, to go to confession to talk about their problems and their doubts, so they would know that they were not alone. So, saints needed help. You need help. Who's helping you in your spiritual life? If you can't answer that, that's probably one reason why you're not growing in your faith. You need other people to help you, personally help you. Who can you turn to in order to help you grow in your faith? I pray there's a St. Claude in your life. Hope you all have a very good day, and we're having a staff meeting today, and we are going to start having our discussion of how to continue and to grow in the graces that we were given at the parish mission. I've had about a week now, a couple weeks of absorbing and taking in what we have received and experienced, and we're going to be offering some ideas and directions as we move forward. So please look for that, okay? And may Almighty God bless you this day. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Claude, pray for us. Have a great day.
For centuries, England had been known as the Island of Saints and Our Lady's Dowry. the country had been dedicated to the Mother of God by many kings of England since the 11th century. Sadly, it lost its claim to both titles in the 16th century at the Protestant Reformation, when King Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell set about destroying Our Lady's shrines, images, and even dragged statues of Our Lady to Chelsea to be burned. But the Blessed Virgin Mary did not cease to watch over the land in which she had been so honoured. Mary Most Holy always leads us to her Son, and especially through her heart to his, to Jesus through Mary's Immaculate Heart to Jesus' Sacred Heart. Thus it was that the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus was brought to England directly from Paray-le-Monial, France, in 1676 by Saint Margaret Mary's confessor, Saint Claude de la Colombière. It was a time predicted by Saint Augustine, when love of God had grown cold in the hearts of the people. In England, the Catholic King Henry VIII had apostatized from the one true church in his desire for a legitimate heir in the eyes of the state. Seeking to have his marriage to Queen Catherine of Aragon annulled, when the Pope and many learned men throughout Christendom declared that this was impossible, since his marriage was valid in the eyes of God and his church, and no man could rent it asunder, the king chose to proclaim himself the head of Christ's church in England, and thus took the country with him into schism. Yet, despite King Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church in England, the rejection of the Blessed Virgin Mary from shrines such as Walsingham, the destruction of abbeys and churches, and the terrible persecutions of the Catholic Church during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, which outlawed the holy sacrifice of the Mass and made it illegal to even carry rosary beads, the English monarchs did not succeed in stamping out the old faith entirely from the land. Those who remained faithful to the outlawed Catholic Church were called recusants, and they upheld the teachings and traditions of the faith of our fathers, even at the cost of many of their lives. English Catholics had hoped that the return of Charles II to the throne would mean a revival of the true faith in England, but this was not so. Protestant hostilities ran high when King Charles II's brother James, the Duke of York, married Mary Beatrice of Modena, a Catholic and a deeply pious princess. So many English people had conformed to the pressures of attending the compulsory state Protestant religion, and with the relentless years of persecution, even for sympathising with Catholicism, with printed propaganda and constant sermons against the Pope and the Church, a new generation had arisen, ignorant of the truth and hostile to what they had been taught was an earthly, outdated power seeking to dominate the land. King Charles II, who had no heir, grew alarmed when the Protestant public demonstrated against his sympathies towards his Catholic brother James, Duke of York, heir to the throne, and his Catholic sister-in-law Mary Modena, so he refused the Duchess the use of her private chapel. This went against the terms of her marriage contract, which stated that she would be able to attend the outlawed Holy Sacrifice of the Mass in her new home in England. Her chaplain, a French Jesuit who came with her to England, was forced to return to France. When things had settled somewhat, the Jesuit superiors in France sent another Jesuit priest to the English court so as to serve the private chapel of the Duchess in St. James's Palace, London. His name was Father Claude de la Colombière. He left Paray-le-Monial, where he had been spiritual director and confessor to St. Margaret Mary, and, guided specifically by our Lord's plan for the English people, brought the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus direct from Paray-le-Monial to England. Our Lady was still watching over her dowry, and her divine Son was sending England a great light to rekindle their love grown cold. Saint Claude de la Colombière was born on February 2nd, 1641, in a small town called Saint Symphorien d'Auzon in France. His family were deeply pious and devout Catholics. As a young boy, Saint Claude showed a great gift for learning and a sharp intellect. Although he was aware of the call to the sacred priesthood at a young age, Saint Claude was 17 when he finally made the decision to join the Society of Jesus and train for the priesthood. After professing his first vows, Saint Claude preached at the canonization of Saint Francis de Sales in 1665, and then went to the College of Clermont in Paris for his studies in theology. Saint Claude was also assigned by his superiors the additional responsibility of tutoring the children of King Louis XIV's Minister of Finance, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. During his stay in Paris, Saint Claude studied Jansenism, the heresy imposed upon the people fear of God, so that they were even too afraid to approach the Blessed Sacrament. People were taught through Jansenism that God was wrathful and frightening, and so love of him and trust in his mercy grew cold. The Jansenism heresy hurt our Lord's heart deeply. Saint Claude combated this heresy from the pulpit. He already had a love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus due to his knowledge of the works of Saint Francis de Sales, which had familiarized him with the heart of Jesus. Meditating on the Passion and on the patience of the suffering Jesus, Saint Claude found in the Divine Heart the perfect school for souls, and saw the love of the Sacred Heart as the greatest remedy against Jansenism. Saint Claude was admitted to solemn profession after a month of spiritual exercises in 1674. He consecrated himself to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now ordained a Jesuit priest, Saint Claude's exceptional preaching and holy example drew many crowds. People also sought to read his published sermons. On the 2nd of February 1675, Saint Claude was named rector of the college at Paray-le-Monial. many people were surprised at this out-of-the-way assignment for a talented young Jesuit priest. But God had important plans for St. Claude, for a nun of the monastery of the Visitation, Margaret Mary Alacoque, had been chosen by our Lord to reveal to the world the devotion of the burning love of his Sacred Heart. Saint Margaret Mary had received this promise from Jesus, who said, "I will send you my faithful servant and perfect friend." Father Claude de la Colombière was the priest who became the confidant of Saint Margaret Mary and the first person to spread the message of Paray-le-Monial. Once in Paray-le-Monial, Saint Claude took up his post as the rector of a small college, superior of the Jesuit community, and extraordinary confessor of the Visitation nuns. It was here that he met Saint Margaret Mary. He heard her confession and helped her understand the value of the message of the Sacred Heart, assuring her that the messages she was receiving from Jesus were authentic and important, and he himself immediately responded to the desire of Jesus that his Sacred Heart be made known to the people. But Saint Claude's assignment to Paray-le-Monial lasted only 18 months. His superiors chose him to go to England as the appointed chaplain of the Duchess of York in 1676. "70 years had passed since the Gunpowder Plot, and there was still a great hostility towards Catholics. Claude was sent to be chaplain to the Duke and Duchess of York, both Catholics. The Duke was the younger brother and heir presumptive of the reigning King Charles II. He had secretly converted to Catholicism. The Duchess, Mary of Modena, was a devout Catholic. Charles II had granted the couple special permission to maintain a chapel in St. James's Palace. Father Claude was given a modest apartment in the palace and moved in on October the 13th, 1676. Despite the magnificent views and opportunity to take leisurely walks in the City of London, St. Claude never even looked out of his window. His focus was upon his ministry, and he wished to console the Sacred Heart of Jesus. St. Claude found England very difficult. Despite the severe winter, he would not hear of any extra heating in his sparse apartment. He found London food inedible. He only used parts of the palace that he was obliged to pass through to reach his apartments, and he only left to visit the sick. St. Claude was also distressed by what he saw among the people. Catholics were deprived of the sacraments, the Catholic faith attacked. Generations had been corrupted in the faith, and what wounded him the most was to see the Most Holy Eucharist so neglected, so little known and loved, and so exposed to outrage. He spent many hours, often into the night, in prayer before the tabernacle, praying for England and for the English people to return to the Catholic faith. St. Claude wrote, "I find many Catholics here, but I am told that the number of the devout amongst them is small. I am not surprised at this, For had we as little help in France as they have here, I think our state would be worse than theirs. No English subject is allowed to enter the ambassador's chapel to hear Mass, and since my arrival, men have been placed at the doors of all the chapels to arrest any Englishman who might be seen entering. St. Claude returned again and again in his preaching to the Eucharistic love of Christ's heart. The Duchess, who led a truly edifying life, became so inflamed with the love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus that it was she who, in 1697, petitioned the Holy See for the institution of a feast in its honour. St. Claude was able to direct St. Margaret Mary in paralemonial by letter, but he was not able to write often. St. Margaret Mary gave him great encouragement, and her letters helped him in his difficult work. So it was that St. Claude lived in St. James's Palace for 2 years, a difficult life, but not without the fruit which an earnest priest in such a situation might have been expected to reap. St. Claude dedicated his time to giving instruction to the many who sought reconciliation with the church they had abandoned. Despite the great dangers, he had the consolation of seeing many Protestants converted, so that after a year he said, "I could write a book about the mercy of God I've seen him exercise since I arrived here." Due to the English climate and exhausting himself in his work, St. Claude fell ill. He assumed he would return to France, but a letter from St. Margaret Mary warned him to prepare his soul for fresh trials. Not long after, in 1678, when a fresh persecution against Catholics was looming, St. Claude received a very special nighttime visitor, a Franciscan by the name of Father John Wall, who would become an important figure for England as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. Father John Wall was a poor friar minor who had spent 22 years secretly ministering to the persecuted Catholics of England. He told St. Claude he had come seeking the strength and counsel of the heart of Jesus from him. For everywhere in England it was known that St. Claude was Christ's apostle. St. Claude welcomed St. John Wall and told the future English martyr, "No one can penetrate into the mysteries of that heart without tasting the cup of bitterness that Jesus drank from so deeply at Gethsemane. Oh, if only I too could win the precious grace that your English priests are reaping in this land of crosses." The two priests celebrated Mass together and perhaps spent the night discussing sublime mysteries and praying together to the Sacred Heart of Jesus for England. Father John Wall then left at dawn. Speaking of his conversation with St. Claude, St. John Wall said, "I had previously heard about the famous Jesuit. When I was in his presence, I felt that I was speaking with St. John the Evangelist, who had come back to earth to rekindle divine love with the same fire of the heart of Jesus. I felt that his attitude was totally the same as what the apostles must have been at the foot of the cross, when the lance pierced his master's side and revealed the tabernacle of his burning charity." Immediately after the future English martyr had met with St. Claude, a storm of fresh persecution broke out against Catholics on account of the Titus Oates plot. When an entirely fictitious conspiracy, invented by a man named Titus Oates, gripped both the English and Scottish kingdoms between 1678 and 1681, St. Claude was caught up in the persecutions. Catholics, it alleged, were plotting against the life of King Charles II and planning to destroy the Church of England. It was said that the Jesuits in England were to carry out the popish plot, and Titus Oates claimed to have attended a meeting in a pub on the Strand where the tactics of the Jesuits were discussed. St. Claude was accused of exercising his priestly ministry and of converting many Protestants and part of the popish plot to overthrow the king, though he was arrested and imprisoned. At the same time, in Worcester, St. John Wall was also apprehended under suspicion of being a party to the Titus Oates plot and sent to the Worcester jail. After being sent to London, he was brought back to Worcester and executed for being a Catholic priest. Many of the onlookers, who were mostly Protestants, wept, and the sheriff reportedly cried out, "End popery! This is the way to make us all papists." St. Claude, meanwhile, spent 3 torturous weeks in an English prison before the intervention of King Louis XIV of France secured St. Claude's banishment from England. In the prison, St. Claude offered his sufferings for the conversion of souls and to console the Sacred Heart of Jesus. How willingly he would have spilt his blood and given his life in order to win England back to the faith of its fathers, and to present it as a conquest through Mary to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, can be understood from the words St. Claude uttered as he stood on the deck of the ship that bore him back to France. Watching the shores of England disappear in the sea mist, he said with tears in his eyes, "You know, O Lord, that at a word, at the slightest intimation from my superiors, I am willing to return to that shore to work and to suffer. Does your justice require yet another victim? Take my life. Verily, O Lord, should you restore this people to the fold of your church, you would find amongst them many true and generous hearts there to glorify, as in the past days, your adorable name." St. Claude de la Colombiere's work in England had been done, the desires of Jesus and Mary fulfilled in this humble Jesuit priest. St. Claude had sown the seeds of the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the hearts of many English people. After spending the last years of his life in France, St. Claude gave his soul to God in the afternoon of February the 15th, 1682, 4 years after leaving England, and having suffered greatly from tuberculosis since his return. He was 41 years of age. St. Claude de la Colombière was beatified in 1929, and Pope John Paul II declared him a saint in 1992. The Universal Church celebrates his feast day on February the 15th. The Sacred Heart devotion in England had taken root thanks to St. Claude de la Colombière. It will always be remembered that the message of love from the Sacred Heart was brought by St. Margaret Mary's own confessor to England. Catholic England can never forget these facts, which connect England so closely with our Lord's chosen apostle of devotion to his heart, Saint Margaret Mary. Catholics are allowed to worship freely throughout Britain now, and many Catholic churches are named in honour of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Indeed, in every Catholic church, a statue honouring the Sacred Heart of Jesus can be found. Today, in Birmingham, England, there stands a special place of pilgrimage, devotion, and education with a powerful focus upon the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It is called Maryvale House, named for Our Lady. Maryvale's link with the Sacred Heart started when Bishop John Milner became Vicar Apostolic of the Midland District in 1803. His devotion to the Sacred Heart saw him build a small chapel, which became the first public shrine of the Sacred Heart in Britain. Upon his return from Rome in 1814, Bishop Milner brought back an image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus on a panel of painted glass, which he placed in a window of the shrine. Devotion to the Sacred Heart became a key part in the life of prayer and faith at Maryvale. A unique place in the history of the Catholic Church in England belongs to Maryvale. For over 1,000 years, Catholic worship has been continuously celebrated on the site. The formerly titled Oscott House contains the oldest part of the present building, and it was the base for the local Catholic mission during the 17th and 18th centuries. One of the last priests to be imprisoned during penal times was Father Andrew Bromwich, who inherited the house and gave it to the Catholic Church as the anti-Catholic laws in England gradually relaxed. It became the first seminary established in England after the Catholic persecutions, and was called St. Mary's College, Oscott, under the patronage of Our Lady. The seminary was relocated, and the building used as a school until Blessed John Henry Newman, upon becoming a Catholic, moved there, renamed it Maryvale, and established the first English oratory. Maryvale still continues to contain Britain's first public shrine to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, with monthly devotions and pilgrimages taking place today. After St. Claude's death in 1682, St. Margaret Mary composed a litany in which she called him Voice of an Apostle, Buckler of the Catholic Faith, and Destroyer of Heresy. Many of our English martyrs displayed a powerful love for the Sacred Heart of Jesus in their defence of the Catholic faith, and shared the same love for England as the holy French Jesuit priest Saint Claude de la Colombière. When English martyr St. Henry Morse stood beneath the Tyburn gallows only 35 years before St. Claude arrived in England, this fellow Jesuit priest said, "The kingdom of England will never be truly blessed until it returns to the Catholic apostolic faith under its head, the Bishop of Rome. All glory I ascribe to God, who was pleased to make use of such a weak instrument, and I therefore pray that my death may be some kind of atonement for the sins of this kingdom, and if I had as many lives as sands on the seashore, I would willingly lay them down for this end, to testify to the truth of the Catholic faith." The English martyrs and St. Claude de la Colombière have shown us that a love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and fidelity to the Catholic and Apostolic Church under the Pope will bring about the conversion of England and the triumph of the Sacred Heart in our land. As Jesus said to Saint Margaret Mary,
"Behold this heart, which has so loved men that it has spared nothing, even to exhausting and consuming itself, to prove to them its love. Therefore, I ask of you that the first Friday after the octave of the Blessed Sacrament shall be kept as a special feast in honour of my heart, to make reparation for all the indignities offered to it, and as a communion day in order to atone for the unworthy treatment it has received when exposed upon the altars. I also promise that my heart shall shed in abundance the influence of its divine love on all those who shall honour it or cause it to be so honoured.
Deus, supplice se precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus, Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitia et insidias diaboli est oppressirium imperet illi Deus supplices te precamur, tuque princeps militiae et celestis Satana maliosque spiritus malignos qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo divina virtute in infernum Sancte Michael
Hello, and welcome or welcome back to those of you who joined the rosary with which preceded the show. By the way, in response to a chat bit of that chat stream, if you're still there, the picture that was up there of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the one that was in conjunction with the rosary beads, is not far from the way that I saw her. That image is one of the ones that is more reminiscent to me of the way I saw her. If I remember, I'll try to put up one that's even closer in a future show, but that one's very close. Okay. Yesterday was the election, or so we thought. And we have this very distressing situation that has to do with both the president not getting reelected and also the lawfare approach strategy, which was done by one of the parties, knowing that they didn't have the votes to win. So they prepared the way with a flood of mail-in ballots, unverifiable, extended voting deadlines so that ballots could be printed as needed to get them over the top and so forth. This is very distressing. All the more reason to pay attention today to divine providence, because absolutely nothing happens that isn't God's choice to have happen. And I know that's very difficult to wrap one's mind around for at least 2 or 3 reasons. One reason is that God does not want sin, and yet so much of what we see around us is the result of sin. So how would you reconcile God not wanting sin with God wanting what happens to happen? That's number one. We'll get the answers from Claude de la Colombière from his book in a few moments. The book is Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence. I will be reading from that. Some of the beginning of the book is actually not by Claude de Colombière, but is by Reverend Jean-Baptiste Saint-Jour. But most of the book is by Claude de la Colombière. And so that's one problem with trusting in divine providence, is how can God, basically God doesn't want sin, and yet everything that happens to us is the result of sin. So how can it all be divine providence, number one? And number two is, of course, why is there so much suffering? And number three is, how can God orchestrate everything to be the most perfect thing when we have free will and everyone else has free will? And if they have free will, how can he make use of decisions they haven't made yet? So how can he plan around events that are in the future and they have free will, so they could go any which way in how they proceed in those events? So those are three very logical difficulties. And that's why we have to refer to the saints, because we can't make our way out of the thicket ourselves. Now let me just make a little short comment about the postponement of the resolution of the election, or whatever you're going to say, which is I really did have my heart for a decisive victory last night, which did not happen. But then this morning, the following occurred to me. It's our own fault, right? Because there's been so much prayer for the president to get reelected. And if he did get reelected last night, that prayer would have ended. But now we're all doubling our prayers, right, until this thing is resolved. And we know how much our Lord likes prayer. So just think of how many more rosaries he's getting because the election outcome is still in doubt. So maybe that's one aspect of the divine providence for not having a speedy resolution to the election. But whatever the outcome is, even if it's disastrous for the country and disastrous for the world, it's still divine providence. So let me stop blathering and get to reading Claude de la Colombière. I talk the talk. I don't walk the walk. I've never pretended to walk the walk. Claude de la Colombière walked the walk, because here he's talking about everything being divine providence. And he went from being this total aristocrat. I'm going to pull up some slides. I know I did his biography before, so I'm going to be real quick. This total aristocrat, very wealthy young man, as you see in that picture. Then he went from that, so to speak, to being assigned to Paray-le-Monial, a beautiful little village in France, to be the spiritual director of a convent of visitation nuns. Here's a picture of Paray-le-Monial, very peaceful and idyllic. And he became the spiritual director, of course, to Margaret Mary Alacoque, who received the Sacred Heart apparitions. Very pleasant and consoling life, of course. And before he became a priest, he was almost, I don't want to say royalty, but he was high aristocracy. And he was a guest at Versailles. Here's the famous Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the palace of Louis XIV. This is very, very high life. And in case you haven't seen it, here is Versailles from the outside. Not exactly a hovel. Okay, that's the Versailles Gardens, and that's part of the Palace of Versailles there. So he went from that to Paray-le-Monial to being the chaplain of a Catholic princess, duchess in England, to being thrown in to a terrible prison for being a Catholic priest in London. Here's the prison. And with all expectation of having the fate that other Catholic priests had at the time, which is being hung, drawn, and quartered, which consists of being dragged on wooden frames by horses from the prison to the execution place, then hanged by the neck, but not allowed to die that way, but cut down alive, castrated, their bowels taken out in front of them. In other words, their stomach cut open and they draw out the intestines. and then burned in front of them, and then finally decapitated and quartered and put into 4 pieces. Not a very happy outcome. Here's a picture of a religious being dragged to the execution place. There you see the, I believe they're monks on those like pallets behind horses. That was very painful because they were dragged through the town over cobblestones at a gallop after having already been tortured and beaten. And then hung, you can see the monk being hung, and then castrated. And in the lower left, you see, I can't tell really whether that's a castration or a disembowelment. I think it's disembowelment. So, Claude de la Colombière, this very nice young aristocratic man, when he talked about everything that happens is the will of God and one should abandon oneself joyfully to it, he was walking the walk. So with that by way of introduction, I will simply go to the book. And here I have a little big screen here that has a little picture of Claude de la Colombière up there in the corner, and a picture of the cover of the book. I have, by the way, on the description, a link to this book on Amazon. It's $6 and change right now. Okay, it's very edifying, needless to say. Just starting at the beginning, I'm of course reading extracts. Nothing happens in the universe without God willing and allowing it. This statement must be taken absolutely of everything with the exception of sin. Nothing occurs by chance in the whole course of our lives is the unanimous teaching of the fathers and doctors of the church, and God intervenes everywhere. Perhaps you will say that while this is true of certain necessary effects like sickness, death, cold and heat, and other accidents due to natural causes which have no liberty of action, the same cannot be said in the case of things that result from the free will of man. For if, you will object, someone slanders me, robs me, strikes me, persecutes me, how can I attribute his conduct to the will of God, who, far from wishing me to be treated in such a manner, expressly forbids it? So the blame, you will conclude, can only be laid on the will of man, on his ignorance or malice. This is the defense behind which we try to shelter from God and excuse our lack of courage and submission. Okay, so if somebody, mugs us in the street and beats us and leaves us bloody, we don't want to say that's the will of God. We'd prefer just to say, look, that man was clearly sinning. God doesn't want sin, so how could it be the will of God? It's not God's fault, it's the man's fault. However, Saint-Jour addresses this now, and he explains how you reconcile this. However, you will perhaps say now, there's sinfulness in all these actions. How then can God will them and take part in them if he is all holy and can have nothing in common with sin? God indeed is not and cannot be the author of sin, but it must be remembered that in every sin there are 2 parts to be distinguished, one natural and the other moral. Thus, in the action of the man you think you have a grievance against, there is, for example, the movement of the arm that strikes you, or the tongue that offends you, and the movement of the will that turns aside from right reason and the law of God. The physical action of the arm or of the tongue, like all natural things, is quite good in itself, and there's nothing to prevent it being produced with and by God's cooperation. What is evil, what God could not cooperate with, is a sinful intention which the will of man contributes to the act. When a man walks with a crippled leg, the movement he makes comes from both the soul and the leg, but the defect which causes him to walk badly is only in the leg. In the same way, all evil actions must be attributed to God and to man insofar as they are natural physical acts, but they can be attributed only to the will of man insofar as they are sinful and blameworthy. However, please forgive me. If then someone strikes you or slanders you, as the movement of the arm or the tongue is in no way a sin, God can very well be and actually is the author of it. For existence and movement in man, not less than in any other creature, proceed not from himself but from God, who acts in him and by him. For in him, says St. Paul, we live and move and have our being. As for the malice of the intention, it proceeds entirely from man, and in it alone is the sinfulness in which God has no share, but which he yet permits, in order not to interfere with our freedom of will. Moreover, when God cooperates with the person who attacks or robs you, he doubtless intends to deprive you of health or goods, because you are making a wrong use of them, and they will be harmful to your soul. But he does not intend that the attacker or robber to take them from you by a sin. That is part of human malice, not God's design. An example might make the matter clearer. A criminal is condemned to death by fair trial, but the executioner happens to be a personal enemy of his, and instead of carrying out the judge's sentence as a duty, he does so in a spirit of hate and revenge. Obviously, the judge has no share in the executioner's sin. The will and intention of the judge is not that this sin should be committed, but that justice should take its course and the criminal be punished. So let me just try to kind of underline what is being said here. Absolutely everything that happens to us, everything is actually divine providence, is what God wants to happen to us, including things that happen to us as a result of the sinful action of another person. It's not that God wills the sin, it's that God wills the result of the sin, and he allows the sin and wants the result which comes from the sin. So as Saint-Just says here, it's not that he intends that the attacker or robber should sin, but he intends to deprive us, in this situation, of health or goods because we are making a wrong use of them and they will be harmful to our souls. So the result is God wants the result, and he makes use of the sin to bring about that result without wanting that sin per se. So he's not guilty of the sin, but he is guilty, so to speak, of the result. He's responsible for allowing that result to happen, because that result happening is what he actually wants. I will go to Saint Claude de la Colombière here now. His part of the writings, because is that true? Excuse me, I know this. I still have a little more of Saint-Just to go before I get to Claude de la Colombière. I'm skipping to a section called "The Great Advantages to be Gained from Entire Conformity to the Divine Will." Okay, I said this before in an earlier show, I believe, but it's really important to understand that everything that happens to us is God's will, and that God is sovereign over absolutely everything that happens, because God's genius, God's love, his mercy, his goodness, his beauty, his creativity is manifest in all of creation. And it's obviously manifest in nature. It's manifest, just think of our bodies and the complexity of our bodies and the genius of us, of any animal being functioning, of life itself. And I would almost say that the greatest of his constructions is his construction of divine providence, because there are, 5 billion, 6 billion people on the face of the earth, and every single one of them, every event in their lives is woven intentionally by God, primarily out of his mercy and out of his love for us and out of his desire to have us with him for all eternity. And, we can't even imagine. I mean, right? You say, well, God can't pay attention to me because I'm one of 6 billion people. But imagine that he does pay attention to you, pays so much attention to you that if you trip and stub your toe, he knows about it and had a hand in it somehow. And then multiply that by 6 billion. That's pretty impressive. So it does us well to glorify God in all of his attributes. And if in fact he is orchestrating and choreographing the destinies of every human being on earth, that is one heck of an accomplishment for which he deserves our praise and our glorifying him. Back to the text. In what does the sanctification of man and his perfection consist? Some, say St. Francis of Sales, place it in austerity, others in giving to charity, others in frequenting the sacraments, others in prayer. But for my part, I know no other perfection than loving God with all one's heart. Without this love, all the virtues are only a heap of stones. That's a quote from Francis of Sales. And the highest, purest, and most excellent part of this love is absolute conformity to the divine will and having in all things no other will but God's. Whoever makes a habit of prayer, says the great Saint Teresa of Avila, should think only of doing everything to conform his will to God's. Be assured that in this conformity consists the highest perfection we can attain, and those who practice it with the greatest care will be favored by God's greatest gift and will make the quickest progress in the interior life. Do not imagine there are any other secrets. All our good consists in this. Now, we normally think of doing God's will in the sense of the Ten Commandments, the commands of the church, the going to church on Sunday, not sinning, not lying, going to confession, and so forth. And those are all, really wonderful. And of course, we're doing God's will because we're not transgressing his commands. But think of how much a greater degree of doing God's will it is to recognize God's will in all the circumstances of our lives and to give him praise and glory for them, whether they suit our tastes, whether they conform to our will or not. So, if we, of course, would like nice weather outside, but instead, it's a freezing blizzard. If we are resenting the weather, then we are preferring our will over God's will. If we accept the weather as God's will and give him praise for it, even though it's contrary to our will, we are choosing his will over our will, and that is a much greater form of congruence, conformity with his will. It's a, I don't know what the word is. It's a much greater reverence of his will than simply not sinning because it's God's will that we do not sin. The more we can accept and see everything that happens as a manifestation of God's will, the more we're on his side, so to speak, instead of being on our side, contrary to his side. Since it is the most perfect act of charity and the most pleasing and acceptable sacrifice that is given to man to offer to God, there can be no doubt that whoever practices entire submission to his will lays up inestimable treasures at every moment and amasses more riches in a few days than others are able to acquire in many years and with great labor. To remain indifferent to good fortune or to adversity by accepting it all from the hand of God without question, nor not to ask for things to be done as we would like them, but as God wishes, to make the intention of all our prayers that God's will should be perfectly accomplished in ourselves and in all creatures, is to find the secret of happiness and content. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him, says the psalmist. He hears their cry and saves them. The Lord keeps all who love him. And again, we know that for those who love God, all things work together unto good. The conforming of our will to God's is not limited to the attainment of our eternal salvation. It also has the effect of making us happy on earth. It will give us the most perfect peace it is possible to experience in life, and is the means of making this world a foretaste of heaven. Now, of course, the prime example of conformity to God's will is, I'll just read this paragraph. I'm taking it a little bit out of sequence. Let us listen to our Savior himself, who came down from heaven to teach us by his word and example. In an excess of zeal, Peter tries to turn him aside from his purpose of submitting to his passion and prevent the soldiers laying their hands on him. But Jesus said to him, "Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" In fact, he attributed the suffering and ignominy of his passion not to the Jews who accused him, not to Judas who betrayed him, not to Pilate who condemned him, not to the soldiers who ill-treated and crucified him, nor to the devil who incited them all, as though they were the immediate causes of his sufferings, but to God, and to God not considered as a strict judge, but as a loving and beloved Father. Let us then never attribute our losses, our disappointments, our afflictions, our humiliations to the devil or to men, but to God as their real source. To act otherwise, says St. Dorothy, would be to do the same as a dog who vents his anger on the stone instead of putting the blame on the hand that threw it at him. So let us be careful not to say, so-and-so is the cause of my misfortune. Your misfortunes are not the work of this or that person, but of God. And what should give you reassurance is that God, the sovereign good, is guided in all his actions by his most profound wisdom for holy and supernatural purposes. Supernatural purposes is part of the key, because, of course, we live for all eternity. God knows that, and he's a lot smarter than us. So he cares a whole lot more about our eternal salvation and the state of our soul after death than he cares about the state of our bank account or, what car we drive or anything else between birth and death. So, look at the situation with Jesus, right? It's all about eternity. It's all about salvation, not about our preferences between birth and death. Now, something popped into my mind, so I want to share it. Before my conversion, I was a consultant, and I had a client who was Israeli. Actually, all my clients were Israeli. That's another story. And this Israeli was a venture capitalist investment banker who was my client. Oddly enough, his name was Michael Angel, like St. Michael the Archangel. It was basically Angel being angel. And he had 2 teenage sons, and he had a big bank account. He had a stock brokerage account. And his broker stole all his clients' money and ran off to Brazil or Venezuela or someplace. I don't remember where. But he basically closed out all his clients' accounts and stole the money and fled the country with the money. And when Michael told me this, I couldn't imagine taking it calmly. His life savings were wiped out, stolen by someone he trusted. But his older son actually had bone cancer. And Michael told me that this when all his money was stolen, it made him realize what was really important, because it woke him up to the fact that he didn't really care about the money. He cared about his son's bone cancer, son's recovery, or whatever was going to happen to his son. And it put everything in perspective for him. So it's just, it's a true story. It's a trivial example, but it's an example of this evil action having a tremendously salutary effect on the spiritual orientation of Michael Engel. And I haven't been in touch with him in 50 or 40 years, 35 years. Anyway, let's throw up a prayer for Michael Engel. He was a very good-hearted, of course, kind of not very religious Israeli Jew, so you can use prayers. Anyway, okay, now I'm going to go to Claude de la Colombière himself and get into the main body. Did his son live? I don't know whether his son lived because because he cheated me. Sorry, that client actually he didn't pay his last bill, and I didn't see him after that. I lost that client when they no longer had use for me. They decided there was no need to pay my last bill since they never needed to see me again. And there's no way I could collect from the United States, the Israeli company. It's only a few $1,000s. It would have cost me far more than that to sue them or whatever. So I lost touch with him. So I don't know if his son lived. I suspect his son lived. It sounded like it was going to be just one of these horrible things, therapy and stuff. Do I recommend this book or Abandonment to Divine Providence? And I would say I don't care. They're very hard to separate in your mind. They say the same thing, and I think they're both really, really wonderful. So take your pick. Okay, on to Claude de la Colombière's part of this book. It is one of the most firmly established and most consoling of the truths that have been revealed to us, is that apart from sin, nothing happens to us in life unless God wills it so. Wealth and poverty alike come from him. If we fall ill, God is the cause of our illness. If we get well, our recovery is due to God. We owe our lives entirely to him, and when death comes to put an end to life, his will be the hand that deals the blow. But should we attribute it to God when we are unjustly persecuted? Yes. He is the only person you can charge with the wrong you suffer. He is not the cause of the sin the person commits by ill-treating you, but he is the cause of the suffering that person inflicts on you while sinning. God did not inspire your enemy with the will to harm you, but he gave him the power to do so. If you receive a wound, do not doubt, but that it is God himself who has wounded you. If all living creatures were to league themselves against you, unless the Creator wished it and joined with them and gave them the strength and means to carry out their purpose, they would never succeed. You would have no power over me if it had not been given you from above, the Savior of the world said to Pilate. We can say the same to demons and men, the brute beasts, and to whatever exists. You would not be able to disturb me or harm me as you do, unless God had ordered it so. You are sent by him. You are given the power by him to tempt me and to make me suffer. You would have no power over me if it had not been given you from above. Pretty interesting, huh? When Pilate condemned Jesus, Jesus didn't blame Pilate, because he said, you would have no power over me if it had not been given you from above. And he apparently wasn't referring to Caesar, but he was referring to God. God gave Pilate the power over Jesus that resulted in crucifixion. Jesus couldn't blame Pilate, in a sense. He would have to blame God. He wasn't about to blame God because he knew that it was what he wanted, actually. Mission, salvation of all of them. If from time to time we meditated seriously on this truth of our faith, it would be enough to stifle all complaint, whatever loss or misfortune we suffer. What I have the Lord gave me, it has been taken away by him. It is not a lawsuit or a thief that has ruined you, or a certain person that has slandered you. If your child dies, it is not by accident or wrong treatment, but because God, to whom all belongs, has not wished you to keep it longer. It is then a truth of our faith that God is responsible for all the happenings we complain of in the world, and furthermore, we cannot doubt that all the misfortunes God sends us have a very useful purpose. We cannot doubt it without imputing to God a lack of judgment in deciding what is advantageous for us. It is usually the case that other people can see better than we can ourselves what is good for us. It would be foolish to think that we can see better than God himself, who is not subject to any of the passions that blind us, knows the future, and can foresee all events, consequences of every action. This is worth stopping on a little, because this is the resolution of the apparent contradiction between free will and the totality of divine providence. It's only an apparent contradiction, right? People always say this. They say, you know, how can you say that that drunk driver broadsiding you was God's will because, or was part of providence, was planned by God, because that driver had free will. You know, he could have turned the wheel to the left or to the right. He could have had that last, you know, shot of whiskey before getting in the car or not. So how can you say that God planned it? Because basically the bugaboo, the incorrect view is that divine providence contradicts free will. Because if God wanted that driver to broadside you, that would mean that driver did not have free will, but he was a puppet that God made him have those drinks and made him, you know, run that stop sign or whatever. But he's not a puppet. He has free will. So therefore, it can't have been divine providence that he broadsided you. That's incorrect, by the way, but that is the common incorrect view. The resolution of the apparent contradiction is that even though that man had free will in getting in his car drunk and running the stop sign, let's say, God knew beforehand that he was going to do that. Now, there are two theories about, yeah, I see that text, by the way, about God's permissive will. And I'm avoiding that because I don't think it's necessary. I think this is a much better explanation. I mean, the explanation in the book than the normal distinguishing between permissive will and ordaining will. I'm going there, I hope. The resolution of that apparent contradiction between free will and the totality of providence is that God knew beforehand that that guy would be drunk, would be running that stop sign, would be at that corner at 11:59 p.m. and ready to broadside you. He knew that beforehand. How could he have known that beforehand? There are two theories. The one that I hold to is God is outside of time. God's outside of time. So even though the person has free will, that doesn't mean that God can't know beforehand what that person will do, because God can just like move through time, so to speak. And, you know, he can make use of what he knows is going to happen before it happens, even though that is going to be the result of someone's free will. I hope this is clear. So that's what I think the resolution is. My understanding of St. Thomas is that St. Thomas thinks the resolution is that God just knows everything so perfectly that he can predict with perfect accuracy, just by knowing the personality, you know, the personality of the guy, and, you know, all of his nature and all of his inclinations and all of his schedule and, you know, all of his patterns of behavior and so forth, that God basically predicts it out of, you know, his omniscience of the present. I don't actually think you have to go there. I think it's perfectly fine just to do away with the sequentiality of time. Yeah, God sees the past, present, and future in one glance. That's what I think. But anyway, that doesn't matter whether you hold to the Thomistic view or if you hold to this outside of time view. All that matters is that you accept that absolutely everything that happens is what God wanted to have happen. Now, if he wanted to have it happen, why tie yourself in knots talking about permissive will? It's not quite ordaining will, because he did not ordain the sin itself. He just made use of the sin. But it's more than permissive will. I mean, he permitted the sin, that's true. You're looking at the sin then you have to talk about permissive will versus ordaining will. But if you're talking about the event, that distinction goes away because he wanted that event to happen, that event of you being broadsided. Okay. Experience shows that even the gravest misfortunes can have good results, and the greatest successes end in disaster. A rule also that God usually follows is to attain his ends by ways that are the opposite of those to which human prudence would normally choose. Let me make another little digression. At the time of Obama's re-election, okay, it was it the re-election or the election? Which was Romney was the re-election, I think. I prayed so much for Romney to win. I prayed so much for Obama to lose. I was suffering a lot in those days. I won't go into details, but it had to do with being cheated and my life being turned upside down. And I offered all of that for the re-election for Obama to be defeated. And when Obama got reelected, I thought, I was really disappointed in God. I'll just leave it at that. Now, however, now we know that Romney was part of the deep state. Romney would not have changed the course of the country. If Romney had won, we'd never have Trump as president. We would never have this incredible possibility of really stopping the one world government in its tracks, stopping the horrible child sexual exploitation that is the infrastructure of the deep state, of getting our country back from the deep state. We wouldn't have had a chance if Romney won. That required Obama being reelected in order to make it possible for Trump to run and be elected 4 years later. So you see, God knew better than I did. What a surprise. So anyway, it's a trivial example in a sense, but you can extend it everywhere. Okay. In our ignorance of what the future holds, how can we be so bold as to question what comes about by God's permission? Surely it is reasonable to think that our complaints are groundless, and that instead of complaining, we ought to be thanking Providence. Joseph was sold into slavery and thrown into prison. If he had felt aggrieved at these apparent misfortunes, he would really have been feeling aggrieved at his happiness, for they were his steps to the throne of Egypt. Let us imagine our confusion when we appear before God and understand the reasons why he sent us the crosses we accept so unwillingly. Mea culpa, mea culpa. The death of a child will then be seen as its rescue from some great evil had it lived, separation from the woman you love, the means of saving you from an unhappy marriage, a severe illness, the reason for many years of life afterward, loss of money, the means of saving your soul from eternal loss. So what are we worried about? God is looking after us, and yet we are full of anxiety. We trust ourselves to a doctor because we suppose he knows his business. He orders an operation which involves cutting away part of our body, and we accept it. We are grateful to him and pay him a large fee because we judge he would not act as he does unless the remedy were necessary, and we must rely on his skill. Yet we are unwilling to treat God in the same way. It looks as if we do not trust his wisdom and are afraid he cannot do his job properly. We allow ourselves to be operated on by a man who may easily make a mistake which may cost us our life, and protest when God sets to work on us. If we could see all he sees, we would unhesitatingly wish for all he wishes. We would beg him on bended knees for those afflictions we now ask him to spare us. To all of us he addresses the words spoken to the sons of Zebedee, "You know not what you ask. O blind of heart, your ignorance saddens me. Let me manage your affairs and look after your interests. I know what you need better than you do yourselves. If I paid heed to what you think you need, you would have been hopelessly ruined long ago." My case, no question. No question. No question. I hope that's not the case in all of your cases, but I can't even begin to count how many times over I would have lost my salvation if God had acceded to my wishes at the time. When God sends us, oh no, I have to skip that section. Okay. Loving recourse to God. Let us now suppose that by these reflections and the help of God, you have freed yourself from all worldly desires, and now say to yourself, all is vanity, and nothing can satisfy my heart. The things that I so earnestly desire may not be at all the things that will bring me happiness. It is difficult for me to distinguish what is good from what is harmful, because good and evil are nearly always mixed, and what was good for yesterday may be bad for today. My desires are only a source of worry, and my efforts to realize them mostly end in failure. After all, the will of God is bound to prevail in the end. Nothing can be done without his command, and he cannot ordain anything that is not for my good. After this, let us suppose that you turn to God with blind trust and surrender yourself unconditionally and unreservedly to him, entirely resolved to put aside your own hopes and fears, short, determined to wish nothing except what he wishes, and to wish all that he wishes. From this moment, you will acquire perfect liberty, and will never again be able to feel troubled or uneasy, and there's no power on earth capable of doing you violence or giving you unrest. You see, not only should we accept everything as divine providence because it's true, but we should accept everything as divine providence, because that's the only way we can escape anxiety and worry and impatience, restlessness. I don't know what the opposite of rest is. Tension. Because things are not always going to be according to our will. They're going to all be always according to God's will. So if we let go of our will and choose to choose God's will, then all of a sudden everything will be going according to our will, so to speak. Or you see what I mean? Our will one step removed, because it'll be God's will, and we no longer have to worry. I keep interrupting myself. Do you guys know the Dolindo Surrender Novena? I'm going to interrupt the show to give you a commercial break, to read a prayer. I didn't put a link on. Okay. I see this talk. Obviously, this show is related to the election and so forth. So I'll before I do the Dolindo prayer, I'll talk about that a bit. Yeah, it's going to look for a while like Biden is winning. Maybe Biden is going to win. If he does win, it's of course God's will. So we don't know better than him. But it's going to look like that for a while, because the whole plan was, of course, that the whole plan by, I'll just say the bad guys, was they knew that the people who went to the polls and voted, and the people who sent in absentee ballots, and even the people who sent in mail-in ballots, the vote would go for Trump and he would be reelected. So what they had to do was arrange a system by which, basically, after the election was over, so to speak, tons more Biden votes would magically appear. And they did that through the profligate use of mail-in ballots, which were not even verified. I think Pennsylvania ruled that they don't need signatures. So there's absolutely no way to know where those mail-in ballots came from. And the same people who printed the ballots for the election were able to print all the ballots they wanted after the election too. So the plan was always for all of these Biden votes to come in after the end of the election. Trump, thank God, knew about this, not because he's God, but because he's smart, and he's got lots of good, smart advisors. He's not a conspiracy theorist. It's that the bad guys do use a conspiracy. So anyway, he knew this beforehand. So the game is not going to be about the votes that come in and how many are for Biden. The game is going to be about the disqualification of votes. Because, for instance, in the case of Pennsylvania, the governor unilaterally said that votes would be accepted up till, I don't know what it was, up until 4 days after the election. But Pennsylvania law didn't allow for that. And so the governor can't just basically make up law. He has to follow the law. So the game in Pennsylvania is that I believe what's going to happen is the Trump administration is going to say you're not allowed to count those votes. Those are all Biden. I don't want to say they're all Biden votes, but they're mostly Biden votes because they're made up to be Biden votes. So, of course, the votes coming in now are going to look like Biden won the election. That was the plan. And the plan of the good guys is to have those votes thrown out because it was illegal to allow them to be counted. It'll go to the Supreme Court. That's why it was so important to get the ninth justice in. Then the plan from the bad guys is going to, remember the first 4 years of Trump, they said he's not really the president because of Russian collusion. The next 4 years, they're going to say he's not really the president because of voter suppression, because he threw out those votes. He didn't count the votes he didn't want to count. They got thrown out because he stacked the Supreme Court. So I believe that the scheme is, this is like an insurance policy, right? If they can't win by the fake votes, they'll have an insurance policy of discrediting the entire next 4 years of the presidency on the basis of those illegitimate votes having been thrown out. So don't panic by the fact that all the votes coming in are now Biden votes, because that's whose printing press they came from or whose Xerox machine they came from. So, okay, the Dolindo, Dolindo. I'll try to remember to put up this a link below the show. This is known as the Surrender Novena, and if you simply Google, Catholic Surrender Novena, you'll find it. This is Jesus talking, and I actually think it was Jesus talking that gave Dolindo this. Why do you confuse yourselves by worrying? Leave the care of your affairs to me, and everything will be peaceful. I say to you in truth that every act of true, blind, complete surrender to me produces the effect that you desire and resolves all difficult situations. There's a different prayer for each of the 9 days. That was day 1. And then it's followed, the daily prayer is always followed by the repetition 10 times of, "Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything." Let's all say that together about the election and who our next president will be. Jesus, oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. Day 2. Surrender to me does not mean to fret, be upset, or to lose hope, nor does it mean offering to me a worried prayer asking me to follow you and change your worry into prayer. That is against this surrender, deeply against it. Worry, to be nervous, and to desire to think about the consequences of anything. It is like the confusion that children feel when they ask their mother to see to their needs and then try to take care of those needs for themselves, so that their childlike efforts get in their mother's way. Surrender means to placidly close the eyes of the soul, turn away from thoughts of tribulation, and to put yourself in my care so that only I act, saying, "You take care of it." Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. How many things I do when the soul, in so much spiritual and material need, turns to me, looks at me, and says to me, "You take care of it," then closes its eyes and rests. In pain, you pray for me to act, but that I act in the way you want. You do not want to turn to me instead. You want me to adapt to your ideas. You are not sick people who ask the doctor to cure you, but rather sick people who tell the doctor how to cure you. So do not act this way, but pray as I taught you in the Our Father. Hallowed be thy name, that is, be glorified in my need. Thy kingdom come, that is, let all that is in us and in the world be in accord with your kingdom. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that is, in our need, decide as you see fit for our temporal and eternal life. If you say to me truly, thy will be done, which is the same as saying you take care of it, I will intervene with all my omnipotence and I will resolve the most difficult situation. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. You take care of everything. Do you see evil growing instead of weakening? Do not worry. Close your eyes and say to me with faith, Thy will be done. You take care of it. I say to you that I will take care of it, and that I will intervene as does a doctor, and I will accomplish miracles when they are needed. Do you see that the sick person is getting worse? Do not be upset, but close your eyes and say, You take care of it. I say to you that I will take care of it, and that there is no medicine more powerful than my loving intervention. By my love, I promise this. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care. And when I must lead you on a path different from the one you see, I will prepare you. I will carry you in my arms. I will let you find yourself like children who have fallen asleep in their mother's arms on the other bank. What troubles you and hurts you immensely are your reason, your thoughts, and your worry, and your desire at all costs to deal with what afflicts you. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Of everything. I perform miracles in proportion to your full surrender to me and to your not thinking of yourselves. I so treasure troves of graces when you are in the deepest poverty. No person of reason, no thinker has ever performed miracles, not even among the saints. He does divine works, whosoever surrenders to God. So don't think about it anymore because your mind is acute, and for you it is very hard to see evil and to trust in me and to not think of you. Do this for all your needs, do this for all of you, and you do this all of you, and you will see great continual silent miracles. I will take care of things, I promise it. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. I don't know if it's here. I thought it was here. But it's here in this form, which is don't think about it anymore. It is very hard to see evil and to trust in me and not to think of yourself. It is very dangerous. Almost, it's very difficult to avoid, but it's very dangerous to look at the evil that we see. If you're looking at the evil, you have the picture of the evil in your mind. It's almost like you're looking at Satan instead of looking at Jesus. So Jesus wants us to look at him and to look away from the evil, and not to look at the evil and say, Jesus, 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 please help, please help, please help. But to look away from the evil and say, okay, Jesus, I know it's there. You take care of it. You see what I mean? I'm not saying I can do this. Remember, I'm the talker of the talk. I'm not the walker of the walk. But Claude de la Colombière is the walker of the walk, right? He walked being hung, drawn, and quartered. So anyway, I'll go back to that. But I am I'm kind of schizophrenic right now because all of this is about, obviously, I'm praying nonstop for the election and so forth, and for against the one world government and against the scheme to take over the world and all of this incredible evil. So I'm kind of falling into the trap. But nonetheless, I think you have to be aware of it. Maybe you don't. Maybe some people have to be aware of it. Other people are better off not being aware of it. But in any case, you're aware of it. You have to bring it to Jesus. But bring it to Jesus. Leave it with Jesus. And don't start, in a way, if you're thinking all the time of the evil, there's a way in which one could say you're almost worshiping Satan. Because it's Satan, it's evil that's in front of your eyes instead of Jesus in front of your eyes. Satan has no power, right? We all know that. He has no power. He'd cease to exist in a nanosecond if God didn't keep him in existence. He's got no sovereign power. He has no sovereign existence. He has no sovereign existence. So in what sense does he ever pull anything over on God? it's not this arm wrestling match. Is God going to win, and is Trump going to get elected? Is devil going to win, and is Biden going to be our president? No, not an arm wrestling match. Okay, it's an arm wrestling match between the hunk and a paraplegic. Excuse me, whatever. You know what I mean. Between Godzilla and a gnat. It's not actually. It's more asymmetric than that, because at least the gnat exists on its own. It doesn't need Godzilla to exist. So, it's not a wrestling match. We don't know what God has in store. We know that he'll be victorious. We know that his plan is the best plan, whatever it is. And maybe that will mean a very pleasant next 10 years for us. And maybe it'll mean we become like Venezuela, and toilet paper, a roll of toilet paper costs a month's wages or whatever. And we're starving in the street and eating our pets. Of course we don't want that. Of course we want the other. But whatever happens will be God's will. And so if we let go of the fact that we want our will instead of God's will, if God's will is sufficiently unpleasant for us, we can let go of that. Then we can be at peace with what happens. And we can still pray, that God's increases his grace, increases his mercy, so that we don't face a great chastisement. And God wants us to pray. But in the context of praying to God that his will turns away from chastisement and towards a pleasant life, not praying like, okay, we have to pray so that God's will wins the day instead of Satan's will. Okay, I hope I don't tie myself too much in knots. You may object that a person on whom both good and evil make the same impression is a pure fiction. It is nothing of the kind. I know people who are just as happy if they are sick or if they are well, if they are badly off or if they are well off. I even know some who even prefer illness and poverty to health and riches. I just read the autobiography of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. It's not easy reading. She definitely preferred illness and poverty and humiliation to health. Her greatest suffering was not suffering enough. It's not the kind of saint, I don't know how to put it, not the kind of saint for us to model ourselves after, but they do exist. Moreover, it is all the more remarkable that the more we submit to God's will, the more he tries to meet our wishes. It would seem that as soon as we make it our sole aim to obey him, he on his part does his best to try to please us. Not only does he answer our prayers, but he even forestalls them by granting the very desires we have endeavored to stifle in our hearts in order to please him, and granting them in a measure we had never imagined. Finally, the happiness of the person whose will is entirely submitted to God's is constant, unchangeable, and endless. No fear comes to disturb it, for no accident can destroy it. He is like a man seated on a rock in the middle of an ocean, who looks on the fury of the waves without dismay, and can amuse himself watching and counting them as they roar and break at his feet. Whether the sea is calm or rough, whichever way the waves are carried by the wind, a matter of indifference to him, for the place where he is firm and unshakable. That is the reason for the peaceful and untroubled expression we find on the faces of those who have dedicated themselves to God. Now, if any of you know, really holy monks or really holy priests or religious or nuns, you'll know what he's talking about. Because it's absolutely amazing. You can find, I know some, like a 70-year-old Sister of Our Lady of Mercy, whose face is like that of a 20-year-old in terms of being completely unwrinkled and smooth and peaceful, and actually radiant. And in her case, it's not Botox and facelifts. It's that. That is the reason for the peaceful and untroubled expression we find on the faces of those who have dedicated. God. It remains to be seen how we can attain to this happy state. One sure way to lead us to it is the frequent practice of the virtue of submission. But as the opportunities for practicing it in a big way come rather seldom, we must take advantage of the small ones which occur daily, and which will soon put us in a position to face the greater trials with equanimity when the time comes. There is no one who does not experience 100 small annoyances every day, caused either by our own carelessness or inattention, or by the inconsiderateness or spite of other people, or by pure accident. Our whole lives are made up of incidents of this kind, occurring ceaselessly from one moment to another, and producing a host of involuntary feelings, dislike and aversion, envy, fear, and impatience, to trouble the serenity of our minds. We let an incautious word slip out and wish we had not said it. Someone says something we find offensive. We have to wait a long time to be served when we are in a hurry. We are irritated by a child's boisterousness. A boring acquaintance buttonholes us. A car splashes us with mud. The weather spoils our outing. Our work is not going as well as we would wish. A tool breaks at a critical moment. We get our clothes torn or stained. These are not the occasions for practicing heroic virtue, but they can be a means of acquiring it if we wish. If we were careful to offer all these petty annoyances to God and accept them as being ordered by His providence, we would soon be in a position to support the greatest misfortunes that can happen to us, besides at the same time insensibly drawing close to intimate union with God. Okay, so the way to reach this total peace from unquestioning submission to God's will doesn't start when we get sentenced to be hung, drawn, and quartered, like Claude de la Colombière. It starts when we're behind, I live in Florida, when we're behind one of these old ladies who you don't see over the seat back, right? Because they never reach the top of the seat back, and they're driving 15 miles an hour in front of you, and you're in a hurry. When you accept that as God's will, you have to start with baby steps, right? When you're in the one line checkout line of the supermarket, where the person in front of you is taking 10 minutes, whereas every other line 6 people have gone through in the same amount of time. When you accept that as God's will, when somebody very rudely cuts you off, changing lanes on the highway, and you have to slam on the brakes. When you do not, curse them under your breath or over your breath. Those petty annoyances are actually the training ground for being able to accept the larger blows of divine providence. So anyway, on to more of Claude de la Colombière. It is a strange fact that though Christ repeatedly and solemnly promised to answer our prayers, most Christians are continually complaining that he does not do so. We cannot account for this by saying that the reason is because of the kind of things we ask for, since he included everything in his promise, all things whatsoever you shall ask. Nor can we attribute it to the unworthiness of those who ask, for his promise extended to everybody without exception. Whoever asks shall receive. Why is it then that so many prayers remain unanswered? Can it be that as most people are never satisfied, they make such excessive and impatient demands on God that they tire and annoy him by their importunity? The case is just the opposite. The only reason why we obtain so little from God is because we ask for so little and we are not insistent enough. Christ promised on behalf of his Father that he would give us everything, even to the very smallest things. But he laid down an order to be observed in all that we ask. If we do not obey this rule, we are unlikely to obtain anything. He tells us in St. Matthew, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be given to you beside." That's the precondition. We get whatever we ask if we seek first his kingdom and his justice. We are not forbidden to wish for money, material well-being, and whatever is necessary to maintain us in our position in life, but we must wish for these things in the proper order. If we want our desires in this respect to be met without fail, we must first of all ask for the larger things, so that while granting them, may also add the smaller things. We can take an example from the case of Solomon. God gave him the choice of whatever he desired, and he asked for wisdom, which was necessary for him to carry out his kingly duties. He did not ask for riches or glory, judging that if God gave him such an opportunity, he ought to make use of it to obtain the greatest advantage. His prudence gained for him both what he asked for and what he did not ask for. Because thou hast asked, this is a quote from the Book of Wisdom, I believe. Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life or riches, behold, I have done for thee according to thy words. I will willingly grant you wisdom because you have asked me for it, but I will give you long life, honor, and riches as well, because you did not ask for any of them, yea, and the things also which thou did not ask, to wit, riches and glory. See? So God gave him everything he could want, because the first thing he asked for, the primary thing he asked for, was seeking his kingdom, justice. If then this is the order God observes in the distribution of his benefits, we must not be surprised if our prayers have so far been unsuccessful. I confess that I am often moved to pity when I see the eagerness of some people in giving alms, making vows of pilgrimage and fasting, or having masses said, for the success of their temporal affairs. I am afraid the prayers they say and get said are of little use. They should make their offerings and vow their pilgrimages to obtain from God the amendment of their lives, the gift of Christian patience, contempt for the things of the world, and detachment from creatures. Then afterwards they could pray for return of health or success in business. God would then answer these prayers, or rather he would anticipate them. It would be enough to know their desires for him to fulfill them. Until we have obtained these first graces, anything else may be harmful for us, and in fact usually is. That is the reason why we are refused. We murmur and accuse God of not keeping his promises, but our God is a Father of kindness, who prefers to put up with our complaints and criticisms rather than stop them by gifts which are fatal to us. Remember when Jesus said, what father would give his child a snake when he asked for a fish? Or would give his child a scorpion when he asked for a stone? I don't remember it exactly. And if a father knows how to give good gifts to his children, how much more does God know how to give good gifts to his children? So, we may think we're asking for a fish, and we may be asking for a scorpion, and God will give us the right way to answer our prayer, so to speak, and not our misunderstanding. Getting back to that re-election of Obama example, see, when I asked for Romney to win, he gave me what I was really asking for, because what I was really asking for was, of course, a restoration of morality and right direction in our country. And Romney would have been a scorpion. I thought he was a fish, but he was a scorpion. So the only way to get me a fish was to have Romney be elected, so that then God could give me Trump the fish. Some of you, I guess any of you who are anti-Trump, have stopped watching long ago. I don't have to worry. However, I didn't want to offend any little old ladies among you who don't get up to the height of your seat and who drive at 15 miles an hour. I know that, actually. I know that when my mother reached that stage, actually, I realized, I'm not allowed to kind of resent this. I'm just seeing to what extent I have time, and I think I'm going to actually skip this next section. I'm not going to do justice to the whole book, but I did, because of the election, that I kind of rearranged things. By the way, I know this may be kind of a little bit much for a no-name saint, but I'm pretty sure that Sunday's show is going to be like my fourth and final show on Claude de la Colombière, more or less. Because there are other things in his prayers that I want to talk about. Anyway, there's just so much wisdom there. Anyway, okay. Exercise in conformity to divine providence. The practice of this exercise is of great importance because of the advantages it always confers on those who undertake it devoutly. Act of faith, hope, and charity. First, make an act of faith in God's providence. Meditate well on the truth that God's continual care extends not only to all things in general, but to each particular thing, and especially to ourselves, our souls, and our bodies, and everything that concerns us. Nothing escapes his loving watchfulness. Our work, our daily needs, our health, as well as our infirmities, our life and our death, even the smallest hair on our head, which cannot fall without his permission. After this act of faith, make an act of hope. Excite in yourself a firm trust that God will provide for all you need, will direct and protect you with more than a father's love and vigilance, and guide you in such a way that whatever happens, if you submit to him, everything will turn out for your happiness and advantage, even the things that may seem quite the opposite. Can you imagine, let us try to imagine, how pleasing this would be to God if we were to make such an act of faith in God's providence and to make such an act of trust in God's taking care of us. Jesus, I trust in you. Heard that. To these two, an act of charity should be added. Show your deep love and attachment for divine providence as a child shows for its mother by taking refuge in her arms. Say how highly you esteem all his intentions, however hidden they may be, in the knowledge that they spring from an infinite wisdom which cannot make a mistake and a supreme goodness which can wish only the perfection of his creatures. Determine that this feeling will have a practical result in making you ready to speak out in defense of providence whenever you hear it denied or criticized. Hope this helped, guys. I read Saint Claude de la Colombiere's Act of Confidence three shows ago. But I'm drawing to the close of the show. It's a little bit shorter because of it being on a weekday. The mass schedule is such that I have to close 20 minutes, maybe have a half an hour, make it to mass. And I raced through, and now I find that I'm a little bit, have a little luxury of repeating his act of confidence in God, Claude's act of God. So I am going to, how can I do things once? Okay, I will read his, I know how I can do this. I will just go through his prayer, his act of confidence in God. I closed the first show with that. And will I consider doing these talks on Zoom? Yeah, can someone tell me how to do that? I really would prefer, actually. I would love this kind of talk. I mean, this kind of prayer thing, it would be wonderful on Zoom. So if anyone out there, including you, Jenny, who suggested, first of all, email me, haveroydtalk@gmail.com. And if you have a Zoom account that allows for whatever it is, more than 12 people or more than an hour or whatever it is, if you have some kind of a Zoom account and want to help me set it up, let me know. We can email back and forth. If you don't have a Zoom account, but you know how to do it, you want to give me advice or something, just email me and I'll try to kind of move things in that direction. Okay, the act of confidence in the act of confidence. Now I want to do something. Okay, I can't. Maybe. Let's see. I can probably hold on a second, guys. I can probably do this. That's the best I can. Okay, there you have it. Act of confidence of Claude de la Colombière. My God, I am so convinced that you keep watch over those who hope in you, and that one can want for nothing. One looks to you for all things, that I am resolved to live in the future without any concerns, and to give all my worries to you, and to live free from every care, and to turn all my anxieties over to you. In peace I sleep and I rest, for thou, O Lord, alone are my hope. Men may strip me of possessions and of honor, sickness may ruin my strength and my means of serving you. I may even lose your grace by sin, but never shall I lose my hope. I will keep it to the last moment of my life, and all the demons of hell will at that moment make but vain efforts to tear it from me, for in peace I sleep and I rest. Others may expect their happiness from their wealth or their talents. Others may rely on the innocence of their life, or the rigor of their penances, or the amount of their alms, or the fervor of their prayers. But thou, O Lord, alone are. As for me, Lord, all my confidence is in my confidence itself. This confidence has never deceived anyone. No one who has hoped in the Lord been confounded. I am thus assured that I shall be eternally happy, since I firmly hope to be, and because it is from you, O God, that I hope it. In thee, O Lord, do I seek refuge. Let me never be put to shame in thy righteousness. I know, alas, I know only too well that I am weak and inconstant. I know what temptations can do against the firmest virtues. I have seen the stars of heaven and the pillars of the firmament fall, but all that cannot frighten me. As long as I hope, I will be sheltered from all misfortunes. I still hope with this unchanging hope. Finally, I am sure that it is impossible to hope too much in you, that I cannot receive less than I have hoped for from you. I'm going to have to do messed up. Thus, I hope you will hold me safe on the steepest slopes, that you will sustain me against the most furious assaults, and that you will make my weakness triumph over the most fearful of my enemies. I hope that you will love me always, and that I too shall love you without ceasing. And to take all at once my hope as far as it can go, I hope from you, you yourself, O my Creator, time and eternity. So be it. Amen. Okay. I got a brainstorm during reading that prayer. Maybe it's not a brainstorm, but I want to share it. Which is, rather than praying that the election goes to Trump, what about if we prayed that the country turns back to God? That the amount of sin and blasphemy and atheism is reduced in this country, that freedom of worship is increased, that God is honored more, that God's honored more by the inhabitants of this country, that he's honored more by the government of this country, that we return to being one nation under God, that we return to being the light on the hill, or maintain being the light on the hill that our founding fathers intended us to be, that we be a beacon of hope and for the whole world, and that we be a source of security and justice and an army against sounding like the Superman TV show, against injustice, around the world, whether it's even if it's only by moral leadership. In other words, rather than interpreting, like I did saying Romney should get elected, rather than telling God what would be best for his interests, that it would be better for your interests if Trump wins. Why don't we just pray for his interests themselves? And if in fact they are best served by Trump winning, that will effectively be a prayer for Trump winning, but it'll be a much better prayer for Trump winning because we will be seeking first his kingdom and his justice, right? And that was the precondition for prayers being answered, seeking first his kingdom and his justice. So let's, think about casting our prayer in the mold of seeking his kingdom and his justice. This is an unbelievable country. It's holding up the world. I'm going to tell you something I didn't intend to tell you. I was just before the show, I was speaking to a financial advisor friend of mine. And she told me something I had no idea about. And she was telling me about the stock market crash in conjunction with the 2008 stock market crash. And she said one reason it was so bad is that the Federal Reserve actually bailed out the whole world. I didn't know that. But she said that what the Federal Reserve did with interest rates or whatever, it was not only kept US banks from failing, but kept the world banking system afloat. That basically, the Federal Reserve took our wealth and basically spread it around the world to preserve the world banking system. Now, I'm not sure I would be really happy about that, but what a country! I mean, what a country! Of course, we had a lot of misguided wars around the world, including very recently. But the motivation. I mean, you can just think of go back to the Vietnam War or something. I mean, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't try to be the policeman of the world, and we shouldn't, have spent, our thousands of lives and trillions of dollars trying to, like the Superman TV show, trying to spread the American way of life and justice and goodness around the world. But we did, we did, and this country is amazing in its goodness in that sense, even misguided goodness, trying to save the world from itself. So, let's just pray that the United States, live up to its potential to do good in the world. And if that means Biden, fine, that means Biden. Fat chance. Okay, with that, I'll leave you. Anyway, I'm sounding like Ben Shapiro or whatever, or what's his name, Michael Medved. But, we do live in the greatest country on earth. And maybe, I don't know if I can say the greatest country. Probably not the greatest country that God ever established, because, maybe during Christendom, maybe some of those Christian kingdoms were really, really good. But amazing, absolutely amazing. And the forces that want to destroy the world, of course, have to destroy the United States to be. That's what this, election seems to have been about. So all we have to do is pray that the United States lives up to its potential to be God's agent in saving souls, and in defending freedom of religion, freedom of man. Blah blah blah. Okay. Yes, thy kingdom come. Pray for massive return to God. And if, chastisements are a good way of getting a massive return to God, God knows best. But our prayer should always be in the context of, but on the other hand, God, you know best. And like that Dolindo surrender novena, if we really trust in God's providence and know that God knows best, then, oh Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. With that, bye for now. Next show will be Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it'll probably be on some prayers of Claude Colombiere, in part because I never got to them yet. And they're very powerful prayers. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. And I would love to improve the technology and get something more interactive going. So if you have any ideas or ways that, just let me know. I need help. I never say goodbye to you guys. I'm promising to, babbling. So goodbye. Let me put up the original screen with the music. Let me see if the music is on. And anyways, there you go. Bye for now.
Defende-nos in prelio contra nequitia et insidias. Diaboli est imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps militiae et celestis Satana maliosque spiritus malignos qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum Sancte Michael Arcangelo